Seeker, if you have made it this far, something inside you has already broken. And you know it. You have reached the goals you promised yourself at 20. You built the career, bought the house, received the recognition you chased so relentlessly. But there is a thick silence that descends upon you when you turn off the bedroom light, a void that does not respond to more achievements. A weight in the center of your chest that society labels as a midlife crisis, but Carl Jung called it by another name. He said it was the first time in decades that your soul was interrupting you mid-sentence. You woke up today and felt the lack of something that has no name. It is not clinical depression. It is not accumulated fatigue. It is your unconscious knocking against the wall of your persona, demanding passage. And as you drink your coffee, trying to ignore this voice, it grows. It turns into insomnia at 3 in the morning. It turns into irritation with the people you love. It turns into that sudden and almost obscene desire to drop everything and disappear in a city where no one knows your surname. Jung mapped this out nearly a century ago. And what he discovered is more disturbing than any modern diagnosis. You are not depressed. You are late. Late regarding a psychic movement that should have started years ago. A movement that the ancients knew by the name of the second half of life. The problem is that the culture in which you were formed erased this map. And without a map, you continue applying the methods of youth to a phase that demands the exact opposite of them. And that is why each new achievement feels smaller than the last. That is why success, when it finally arrived, tasted like cardboard in your mouth. You were trained since you were a child to climb, to conquer, to validate your existence through visible trophies, degree, salary, house, car, marriage, children, travel, followers. The first half of life works this way, and it works because it has to. Jung did not deny this. He said that the ego must be built before it can be transcended, that the castle must exist before it can be vacated. The drama is elsewhere. The drama is that no one warned you there was a second act. No one told you that. Around 35, 40, 50 years old, the entire psyche begins to invert its axis. And what brought you here will not take you further. Think of the sun. It rises on the horizon, climbs, gains heat, and occupies the entire sky until noon. This is the movement of the first half of life. Expansion, heat, visibility. But from noon on, it begins to descend. And this descent is not decay. It is not failure. It is not loss. It is the other half of the natural movement itself. The drama of contemporary neurosis, Jung said, is the sun that refuses to set. It is the 50-year-old man wearing the clothes of a teenager, chasing the same ambitions as the intern beside him, posting the same performative photos. Inside, he knows something is wrong. Outside, he tries harder, and the more he struggles to stay at noon, the more his psyche organizes a silent sabotage to force him to descend. That is why brilliant people begin to destroy their own careers in their 40s. That is why solid marriages implode for no apparent reason. That is why successful executives develop autoimmune diseases, panic inside meeting rooms, or simply wake up one day with an uncontrollable urge to vanish. It is not a character flaw. It is the psyche applying brute force because you ignored the subtle signs. Jung wrote this in a way that burns when read aloud. That which is not brought to consciousness appears in life as fate. And you are calling fate what is in truth your own unconscious collecting an overdue bill. And here begin the 4 pillars. The first pillar is to turn inward. It sounds simple, but it is not. Turning inward does not mean meditating for 10 minutes a day between one meeting and another. It doesn't mean going to therapy once a week to complain about your mother and then going back to operating on autopilot. Turning inward, in the Jungian sense, means starting to ask questions you've spent your entire life avoiding. Who are you when you aren't producing? Who are you when no one is watching? Who are you when all the social roles that sustain your identity are stripped away? The professional, the father, the mother, the responsible child, the reliable friend. Is there anything left, or do you discover that you've built an entire life upon a hollow structure? Most people avoid this question because the initial answer is unbearable. Very little remains. An echo remains. A generic exhaustion remains. The exhaustion of someone who has spent decades executing a script written by others. But it is precisely in this little that the gold is found. Jung used to say that the gold is in the shadow, and the first shadow one encounters when turning inward is the shadow of lost time. The grief for the life you didn't live. The grief for the decisions you made to please people who don't even remember your name anymore. Sitting with this grief is not weakness. It is the first act of psychological courage that many adults never perform in their entire lives. And this is where the second pillar begins, and it is harsher than the first. Integrating the shadow. The shadow is everything you pushed into the basement of your personality because it was too unacceptable to your parents, to your church, to your school, to your culture. Your anger, which you learned to call patience. Your selfishness, which you learned to call generosity. Your envy, which you learned to call sincere support. Your desire, which you learned to call affection. You spent decades building an impeccable persona, and every brick of that persona was taken from the material you discarded from yourself. But what is discarded does not disappear. It rots in the basement, and at some point, the smell starts to rise. Have you ever noticed that you loathe, with disproportionate intensity, specific people who cross your path? That arrogant colleague, that vain relative, that friend who sells themselves out easily. The intensity of your repulsion is the thermometer. You are looking at a part of yourself that you projected outward because you couldn't bear to contain it within. Jung said that everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. He wasn't being poetic, he was being surgical. Your shadow speaks through your hatred, and as long as you don't listen to it, you will continue to reproduce in your life the same situations, the same toxic partners, the same humiliating bosses, the same friends who betray you. Because the shadow not acknowledged will seek you out in others until you agree to receive it into yourself. Integrating the shadow is the hardest work of aging, because integrating is not the same as justifying. It is not about becoming a bitter person who unloads their own anger onto the world in the name of authenticity. It is about acknowledging that your anger exists, giving it a conscious place, and letting it inform your decisions instead of sabotaging them from behind your back. It is about admitting that you are selfish without hating yourself for it, and using that lucidity to choose genuine gestures instead of performative ones. The person who has integrated the shadow is not good. They are whole. And wholeness in Jung is worth more than manufactured goodness, because manufactured goodness charges interest, and the interest is paid by the people closest to you. And it is exactly at this point that many people get stuck. They don't get stuck for lack of intelligence. They get stuck for lack of a map. You read these concepts, you feel something stir inside you, you write down phrases, you buy books, and 2 weeks later you are back in the same loop. The same irritation, the same persona, the same metaphysical exhaustion. Why does this happen? Because Jung's material was not intended to be consumed as intellectual entertainment. It was intended to be applied to a slow, dirty, technical work of self-observation. And no one taught you how to do this work. University psychology gives you theory. Conventional therapy gives you symptomatic relief. Self-help gives you pretty phrases. But the concrete protocol of individuation, the step-by-step process of how to track your own shadow, decode your own dreams, identify your own complexes, this protocol remains locked in the dense volumes of the complete works, written in a language that seems designed to push you away. It was to solve this exact abyss that O Código do Despertar exists. It is not a psychology course. It is the instruction manual for your own psyche, the material that translates Jung into an operational method, step by step, for someone who needs to apply this in real life, not in a classroom. Inside, you learn to recognize the internal signals that your unconscious sends daily and that you are trained to ignore. You learn to dissolve the invisible noises that sabotage your decisions even before they are made. You learn to decipher the hidden language of dreams, armor yourself against narcissistic manipulation, and map the unconscious patterns that repeat in your life like a scratched record. Access to O Código do Despertar is in the first pinned comment of this video. Go there, read it carefully, and come back, because what comes next requires you to be equipped. Turning inward and integrating the shadow is still not enough. Those are the first two pillars. The third is where many adults stop and get lost for years, finding meaning beyond achievements. When you dismantle the persona and embrace the shadow, your old source of meaning evaporates. Career ceases to thrill you the way it once did. Money becomes just a number. Recognition becomes noise. You look at what you have built and think, what now? This question, when it appears for the first time, is often confused with depression. But it is not. It is the symptom that the old structure of meaning has fallen, and the new one has not yet been raised. It is the no man's land between two systems of values. Jung used to say that the second half of life belongs to being, not to doing. This is hard to swallow for someone who has been formatted by the capitalism of productivity. You were trained to feel alive only when you are executing, delivering, generating. Standing still is a form of symbolic death for the Western ego. But Jung observed that without this capacity to stand still, without this capacity to contemplate, without this capacity to connect with something he called the self, an instance greater than the ego, which organizes the meaning behind the events of your life, old age turns into a bitter wait for death. Elderly people who have never crossed this pillar become caricatures of themselves. They keep talking about the glorious past. They keep trying to be relevant. They keep competing for attention like teenagers. Not because they are foolish, but because no one taught them that there was another way to exist after 50. Finding meaning beyond achievements means discovering that there is an entire wealth in what produces nothing visible. The long conversation with a grandchild, the silent reading of a book you will not cite at any dinner, the aimless walk, the care for a plant, the contemplation of a window. I'm not talking about becoming a superficial contemplative, the kind who posts a picture of tea at a perfect angle. I'm talking about an internal reorganization of what produces the feeling of being alive. When this reorganization happens, you discover that the best years are not behind you. They begin now because it is now that you are ready to live them without noise. And the fourth pillar is what sustains the other three, making peace with death. I am not talking about accepting the death of others, although that is also included. I am talking about your death, yours. The death of the body you inhabit now, the death of the person you, known as being you. Jung was almost brutal on this point. He said that the relationship you have with your mortality determines the quality of your present existence. And he observed that people who avoided thinking about death became ill in a specific way. A form of living death, a generalized anesthesia, an inability to feel the texture of things, because to feel is to draw near to that which is lost. The central paradox of human existence is this: you only fully enjoy what you know you will lose. The flavor of the fruit is provided by the fact that it will rot. The weight of an embrace is provided by the fact that that person, one day, will no longer be there. The intensity of a sunny morning is provided by the fact that there are finite mornings. Those who deny death anesthetize life. Those who accept death reclaim life. Accepting death does not mean wanting to die. It does not mean cultivating morbidity. It means stopping living as if you had unlimited time to resolve emotional hang-ups with your parents, to say what needs to be said to your children, to reconcile yourself with the person you have become. It means looking at your internal clock and admitting, what I do not do today, I may never do. And this admission, far from paralyzing, liberates. It liberates because it ends existential procrastination. It liberates because it cuts away the excess. It liberates because it restores hierarchy to what matters. People who have done this work do not speak of it with a dragging voice and a lost look. They speak of it with firmness, with humor, with a serenity that has nothing to do with resignation. They age like ancient trees, cracked, twisted, and exactly for that reason, sculpturally beautiful. Now stop and look at these four pillars together, because the point is not to collect them like items on a list. The point is that they form a circuit. They feed one another. Turning inward is what allows you to see the shadow. Seeing and integrating the shadow is what dissolves the old source of meaning, making space for a new one. Finding this new source of meaning is what makes it possible to accept finitude without despair. And accepting finitude is what returns, in feedback, a new depth to the gesture of turning inward. The circuit spins. And as it spins, the person changes, not by willpower, by force of internal coherence. This is why Jung said it is not about a cure. It is about a process of individuation, and to individuate is to become what you always were, but which was buried beneath the masks necessary to survive socially. It is a return, but it is a return that can only be made after you have gone far enough to get lost. Youth must get lost. Maturity must find itself again, and those who flee the second task remain trapped forever in the first. Repeating at 60 the gestures that made sense at 25, and feeling, without understanding why, that every gesture weighs more than it weighed before. What is then a happy old age, in the Jungian conception? It is not the old age of one who remained young. It is not the old age of one who stayed productive until falling into the coffin. It is not the old age of one who collects certificates, trips, or followers on the web. It is the old age of one who lived the last phase of life on their own terms, of one who abandoned the performances, of one who stopped seeking validation at tables that never really invited them, of one who made peace with the mistakes of the past, not because they justified them, but because they passed through them, of one who is at peace with their own company, of one who does not need the phone to ring to feel existent, of one who looks in the mirror and recognizes without pride and without contempt the person standing there. This person has become rare. You can count on your fingers how many people like this you have met in your life. Perhaps a grandmother, perhaps an old teacher, perhaps a neighbor who had a garden and a different kind of silence. You remember them because they radiated something that the rest of the world, it no longer emits, a frequency of presence that required proving nothing. They were there, whole, available, without haste, without a hidden agenda, and you, upon approaching these people, felt your own nervous system reorganize itself. You breathed better, thought better, existed better through contagion. This contagion is the result of the 4 pillars applied. It is the empirical evidence that Jung's theory was not academic speculation. It was clinical observation of people who had completed an internal trajectory that the overwhelming majority never does. And you have a choice as to whether you complete it or not. That is the part that no one told you. There is a choice. The psyche will not push you toward individuation against your will. It will send you symptoms, signs, dreams, illnesses, acts of sabotage, synchronicities. But if you choose to ignore all of this and go to the end as if nothing were happening, it will grant you that right. You will die as you were born, unconscious. And in that case, Jung would say, your biography will have been a sequence of events without an internal narrator. A life that happened to you, not lived by you. Look now at your current life. Stop for a few seconds before continuing to read and look. Which of these pillars are you fleeing from? Perhaps you think you are too busy to turn inward, and busyness, in this case, is the flight itself. Perhaps you are dodging the shadow by projecting it onto specific people you need to cut out of your life, and those people are your mirrors, not your enemies. Perhaps you are still tied to a definition of meaning that was valid 20 years ago, but is now dead weight. Or perhaps you are sweeping the idea of death under the rug, and in doing so are sweeping away the very texture of life itself. Identifying where you are stuck is already half the way. But only half. The other half is concrete work. And concrete work is not found in random videos, in motivational quotes, in fragmented posts that you consume while waiting for the elevator. Concrete work requires a system, material that stitches concepts together, offers exercises, and takes you by the hand through an internal path that has stages, has order, and has consequence. That is exactly what O Código do. Despertar was built to do, and access remains open in the first pinned comment below. I'm not asking you to believe me. I'm asking you to test the only thing you haven't tested yet, looking at yourself with method, not with anxiety. Go back now to Jung. There is a phrase of his that many people cite without understanding. He said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you are. Note the verb, to become. Not to be born being, not to discover yourself being. To become. It implies work. It implies time. It implies that there is a version of you waiting on the other side of the river, and that this version is only built by crossing, and that the crossing is the meaning, not the destination. The crossing. And here is the final discomfort, what no refrigerator magnet quote will give you. A happy old age is not a prize. It is not a reward for a well-behaved life. It does not fall from the sky upon the right people. It is built day after day by the micro-choices you are making now. This month, this week, in this minute where you are hesitating between continuing to read this text seriously or returning to scroll the screen in search of the next stimulus. Every time you choose the stimulus, you postpone the pillar. Every time you choose depth, you add a row of bricks to what will sustain you when the body begins to yield. And the body will yield. There is no battle won on that front. The question has never been whether you will age. The question has always been who will be there, inside that aged body, when youth has gone away. Will it be a bitter stranger, complaining, resentful of time? Or will it be a whole person, lucid, capable of inhabiting their own? Silence without needing to run away from it. The answer to this question is being given right now, by every gesture you perform, by every conversation you avoid, by every dream you discard without writing down, by every part of yourself that you keep pushing into the basement, hoping that someday it will disappear on its own. It will not disappear on its own. Jung spent 5 decades studying what happens to that which is not integrated, and the conclusion is always the same. The repressed returns, always, with interest. And the best time to integrate was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. You can close this video. Go back to your routine. Tell yourself that you will think about this later. You can call your paralysis reflection, your avoidance, a breather, your inertia, patience with yourself. The algorithm will deliver the next piece of content to you in 3 seconds, and the anesthesia continues. Or you can go down to the first pinned comment, open access to the Código do Despertar, and start doing today the work that your psyche has been demanding of you for years. Not tomorrow, not on Monday, today. The cuatro pilares are before you. The choice is before you. Time, however, is not. Time is passing while you read this last line. Decide.